Hello, Michael here from Small Robot Studio with another Renderman for Houdini tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at how to create this ocean scene, so let's get started. You'll see here that I've got a couple of, I've just got really one mesh in the scene already. You don't need anything, but it doesn't hurt to have something in there for a little bit of scale. So just chuck a ball or a cube in there, just so you can kind of get a feel for the size of your waves that you're going to be using. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you will know that I've done these tutorials previously for AA Ocean, but today we're just going to be using the built-in Houdini geometry deformations for our waves and our ocean. So to begin, we're going to create a geo node, and we'll call this ocean. We'll dive in there and we'll create a grid. Now, if you want to follow along with me, make sure that you use the same dimensions and scale that I do. So I'm going to change my rows and columns to be 500 by 500 and my size to be 100 by 100. This resolution is important for when we're actually displacing the ocean with our ocean displacement tools, as it will be affected by the multiplication of those elements. So what we need to do now is add in an ocean spectrum. And an ocean evaluate, and what we're doing is plugging the grid into the left side and then telling the evaluate what to do based on the right hand side, which is the ocean spectrum. So when we view the evaluate, you'll see that we've got this displacement now. So we'll make a couple of quick changes to the ocean spectrum. I'm going to make this somewhat calm, but to start with I'm just going to increase the resolution because I want it to look really nice. If you're blocking something out and it's quite large, you may want to work with a lower resolution and then increase it as necessary. I'm also going to loop this for 10 seconds. That's something you can do as well. And that way when you use the playback, the start and the end of the wave cycle will be the same. So that would be 210 seconds, 240 frames at 24 frames a second. So to make this a bit calmer, I'm just going to reduce the speed and I'm going to make it a bit choppier. We'll just make that 1.0. I'm going to increase the wind speed and increase the scale to 4. Though you need to be careful that you don't get any of these sort of clipped parts here, so I might drop that back to 3. Those there won't be too much of an issue. And I'm also going to add a little bit of noise, so this just randomizes. You can see some parts of them, the waves aren't being displaced, and I'm going to keep that as is. These non-displaced areas pick up light really well and reflect them. So if you've got a nice HDRI, which we're about to add in, having these areas that are masked out randomly will actually create some nice areas, especially if you've got a long shot. This is sort of what you would consider to be a undercurrent or a rip. I'm not sure if that's what everyone calls it in every country. In New Zealand we call it a rip. So yeah, that's the undercurrent that you would see, the calm spots in the surf. Okay, so that's the main blocking out of the ocean done. So let's jump up a level. We also need to create an ocean floor. So I'm going to create another geo node and we'll call this floor. The floor is really important for the shading and lighting aspect of this. If you don't have a floor in, it will look like a lot deeper ocean. I'm sort of making this visually look like it's sort of in a harbor, sort of maybe no deeper than a couple of meters. So let's create a grid again, and we'll just make that the same size as our ocean water. Create a transform so we can move it down, and we'll move that down by -5, maybe a little bit more. -10 looks good. And we'll increase the rows and columns to 50, and then I'm just going to, now this is a really good trick. I'm going to use a mountain here on the ground, and this is just going to vary the value that we're seeing as the light is being transmitted through the water. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger and the elements a bit bigger, something like that. So now when we're looking in from this angle and let's say the light's in front of us, it's going to be coming through, bouncing off the ground and bouncing back toward us, and because there's these lower areas, they're going to be a bit darker than the higher areas. Okay, we also need to add a camera in, so I'm just going to control click the camera and lock onto it, and then I'm just going to set up a shot here. I think my reference image is something like this. And I'm going to kind of have the sun over here in the background. So then we'll add some lights. So we'll start with a dome light, which I'm just going to add from the shelf. And I'm going to add an HDRI in. The HDRI that I'm using here is a sunset, which is obviously going to look nice because everyone loves a sunset. But the other important thing about it is the floor of it. It's I think it's shot in a quarry, but it kind of looks like a desert. So something that's like a desert HDRI or a beach HDRI is going to be a little bit more realistic looking because of the nature of the ground that's going to be projecting light upwards. So keep that in mind when you're selecting an HDRI. This is from HDRI Haven. If you're looking to use the same one, it's the chalk quarry one, and I'm using the 4K map. Now you can enable in viewport if you wish. I'm just going to enable it in the viewport to line it up. First I'm just going to set my camera up a bit better. Okay, so we'll call it something that looks like that and unlock it, and then I just want to rotate the HDRI. So the sunset is going to be the direction of the camera. So I need to rotate it basically 180 degrees, which if you select the rotate tool with your dome light selected, you should be able to do it pretty easily. And I've just put on wireframe shaded. We'll make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, so the camera is there. Make that camera look a bit bigger as well. So it's just easier to spot. So I just need to rotate it around to the left a little bit. All right, let's have a look through our camera. Perfect. Pretty much there. All right, so the HDRI is going to do a really nice job, but I'm going to actually add in a light that's going to emulate the sun as well, just to get a little bit extra light. We'll show you. We'll do a render right now so you can see what it looks like. I don't have any materials on anything, but you'll get an idea of what the light is doing. But before we render it, we'll need to add in a render operator. So that's your render operator there, which if we just create a new tab, I'll just have that there so I can go to the output. And actually I'm just going to lower the resolution of the camera so it doesn't take forever to render. So there's going to be 960 by 540, so still 16 by 9. And we won't put depth of field on yet, but I might actually use that before we finish up. And I'm also, you don't have to do this step, this is just for me, because I'm recording, I'm just going to lower the thread count so I can record and render at the same time, otherwise the computer doesn't really like it very much. Okay, and then we'll go to the render view, select our camera and render. Okay, and our HDRI is not visible, which we will change. So we're just going to go under the render tab and select camera visibility. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So we'll start getting some materials in. I'll just quickly do the materials for the robot and the droplets that are on him. So what we're going to do here is, if you want to save your position of your camera, just activate the memory toolbar and select the eye icon, and then click one of your positions, and then that way you can move your camera around, and if you want to change your shot back to where it was, you can. So we're just going to create a material network. So I've just done the materials for the robot and the droplets, which is not very exciting, but we'll do the base material for the ocean now. So we'll just create a PXR material builder, drag that on, and we'll call this ocean, and we will dive in there and create a PXR surface, plug that into our shader output, and then we'll just set up the very base, which is going to be no gain on the diffuse, and then glass, increase reflection and refraction. And we'll jump up, and I've just noticed that the ocean needs to be subdivided, so we'll select it, and we'll go to the Renderman tab and add spare parameters. This gives us a Renderman tab for that geo node. So now we can go into the geometry, subdivision, and add subdivisions. We'll do the same thing for the floor. So let's take a quick render now. Okay, so that doesn't look too bad. I prefer if those droplets weren't on the near side, so I'm just going to take those off. I just kind of want them on the silhouette, not very realistic, but it's a good cheaty thing to do. Otherwise the ocean doesn't look too bad, not very exciting at the moment though. What we're going to want to do here is add in an additional light to represent the sun, and that's going to give us a little bit more highlights in the ocean surf and on our robot. I'm just going to rotate the camera slightly as well. something a bit higher I think will do, so we can see a little bit more of this light leading up here. And I'm going to use the It previewer to do this, so we can adjust our camera while we're looking at the render. Let's save that camera position. And so we'll add in a light for the sun, and this is going to be a distant light. Okay, so there's our distant light in the scene, and we're going to just position that so it's pointing the same direction as our sun. And I might just turn off the light for a second so we can see what's going on. Okay, so we'll rotate that and point it down a little bit. Okay, so with the IPR running, you can see that the light is not lined up with the sun, so we just need to rotate it till it's in the position. That looks good. And we're also going to change the angle extent to be 0.2, which will just make the source a little bit smaller, so it should be similar to the reflections that we're getting from the sun that's already in the HDRI. That looks about right. And then we're just going to change the color to be a peachy sort of color. Okay, and then I'm just going to use H to look at our luminance, and that value is starting to look a little bit better. Still may change where the camera is, and I've got to get rid of those droplets. Okay, so now we need to just finish the shading for our ocean. So let's point the camera down a little bit, and we'll take another render. So at the moment the ocean is very transparent, and it is very blue looking, and that is mainly because of the reflection of the HDRI that we're using. You can see it's got that bluish sand, and the way that the sand that we've created is reflecting the light from the bottom of the glass. It's projecting a bluish hue upwards that you can see if you look over the edge. It's very transparent, so there's no actual tint to the water. You can add that in if you want. I'm going to do so. So we'll go into our material editor for our ocean. I'm just going to go back to this layout. Okay. So our ocean currently has no diffuse, and the glass is refracting a clear white color. So we can actually change that to be, we'll make it very slightly green. And I'm talking very slightly. We'll run the IPR so we can see the change. So if you compare those two, it does make a bit of difference even at a very low value. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we can also add in subsurface scattering to help it look like it's a bit murkier, and I'll try and get a camera angle that helps show this. So at the moment you can see the water is refracting a clearish green color, and we can actually add in some single scattering to affect that. So what we'll do is we'll add a green color to our mean free path color, and we'll actually make that pretty dark and a little bit desaturated. And then our main color will also make this bluish green color that we used for the refraction, not quite the exact same. And now I'll increase the gain to 1.0 and run the render again. So you can see the difference that it makes. It's more obvious as there's things under the water. As you can see, if you look at the areas that are that the robot's in, but because there's nothing submerged completely under the water, it's not a huge difference, but we are seeing a bit of difference also with the floor that's under there. We can affect this a little bit with the directionality as well, which can be quite useful. So if we run the render again, we can move the directionality to say 0.99, and you can see that only the near areas are sort of getting that refraction, the murkiness. And then inversely, if we push it the other direction, you get the opposite effect. So you can see when comparing the initial without the subsurface scattering to without the directionality to the directionality, that might give you the sort of look you're looking for if you're trying to do something that's a little bit more, well in this case it's sort of more Caribbean, like atoll-y or islandy. But if you're looking for more deep sea stuff, you probably won't use subsurface scattering, and then you can just also omit the floor or put a darker floor color in. I actually haven't textured the floor, so why don't we add a little bit of texture or material to the floor with another Pixar material builder, and we'll just drag that on there, and we'll call this sand floor. And all this is going to be is another Pixar surface with a light yellow diffuse color. Now you can see that by changing the color of the floor, we've actually changed the color of the water quite a bit because of the color that's being refracted through it. Now finally, one thing that you can add in with the shader is some foam to your water. So what we're going to do is jump into our ocean again, and we're going to use a curvature node. And to look dev this, what I'm going to do is just turn the glass off and turn the single scattering off, and then turn the diffuse back on, so I can run the result RGB into the diffuse color. Then if I run the IPR, we'll just need to increase the max distance, and what you'll see is we get this foam that's surrounding the object that is, or our object that is in the water, and then we also start to get these foamy areas on some of the more pinched waves, and we can bias this to get an increased effect. And we can also increase the gain to get something like that. So the black area is going to have no foam, and the white area is going to have a little bit of foam. So we're going to plug this into our diffuse gain now, and to do that we'll use a 2 float node. So that will just allow us to run our RGB, which is a 3 float, into a single float gain of our diffused. So now we can change our diffuse color to be, we could actually make it a bluish white or greenish white. We'll re-enable our single scatter and our glass, and then we can IPR that. So this is a really quick and cheap way of having some interaction between your water and objects that are near it or in it, like intersecting it, as well as adding a little bit more detail to the peaks of your waves. And you can adjust this a lot more if you want to use a clamp or a threshold, so you can really tighten it up to the peaks of the waves, but I think like this is not too bad. So let's just get our shot finalized now. So we'll just go back to our initial camera angle. Okay, so it's getting to evening in the shot, so the water actually looks a little bit too bright for my taste. So what I'm going to do is go into our glass lobe and select the refraction color, and we're just going to change the value to a darker color. And I've also just gone into the pixar curvature and I've reduced the distance, so we're only getting this little bit of white foam around the very edge there and on some of the very tips of the ocean. And just to make it look a little bit more realistic, we'll finally add in a depth of field. So we'll do that by selecting the camera, space F, and we'll just use the gizmo to move the focal point to the near edge of the robot. And I'll go to sampling, and I'm going to change the f-stop to be probably pretty low, 0.5. This is not realistic, I haven't done this to scale. We will go back to the output, and we'll enable depth of field, run the IPR, and I also want to add denoising to this. We will go to Images tab, and we'll go to Denoise, single frame, and it'll allow us to denoise in the It previewer. Run the IPR, then we can just use the N key to enable denoising. Okay, that's not completely rendered up, but you get the idea. I'll just show a final render over the screen here. So you can see that with the light lined up with the sun, you get a really nice effect. I may have to make that a little bit narrower still. And I've got the droplets over the sort of silhouette of the robot because the foreground droplets looked a bit too dark for my taste. So just with enough specularity on your model, you'll probably get a pretty good result. But without having to deal with animation or any simulation, I think this is a pretty good result. That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.